The woman who was supposed to become my mother-in-law tried to destroy my dream wedding. She demanded I cancel the dress I'd spent months designing. But when I walked down the aisle, she realized too late that her manipulation had backfired in the most poetic way possible. Before we dive into this story, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss a tale of justice. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments. Okay, let's get into it. I still remember the exact moment it happened. The phone call that changed the way I saw my future mother-in-law forever. It was a Thursday evening, and I was sitting on the couch with my laptop open, scrolling through photos of lace and satin, trying to finalize the last few details of my wedding dress. The soft hum of excitement that had followed me for weeks was still there, the kind of joy that comes with knowing your life is about to step into something beautiful and new. And then my phone rang. It was Linda. Her voice, as always, was syrupy sweet at first. "Hi, dear," she said, the way someone says hi before dropping a bomb. "I've been thinking about your dress." I smiled politely, even though I knew what that tone meant. Whenever Linda thought about something, it usually meant she'd decided what was best for me, and everyone else was expected to fall in line. Though, what about it? I asked, still trying to sound light. She sighed dramatically. "Well, I saw those sketches you showed Tom's sister, and honestly, honey, I think it's not very flattering. You're such a lovely girl, but you really don't have the height for that silhouette. I already spoke to your seamstress and told her to hold off." At first, I didn't even understand what she meant. Hold off. I blinked at my screen, my stomach tightening. "Wait, you called my seamstress?" "Yes," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I told her to cancel your order until we could talk." "You should be thanking me, dear. That woman was about to waste your money." There was a long silence on my end. My ears buzzed. My mind struggled to process what I'd just heard. Cancel my dress. My custom dress. The one I'd been designing for months with a woman who had worked with my mother before she passed. The one that was supposed to honor her memory. The one thing about this wedding that felt truly mine. Linda kept talking, her voice full of self-satisfaction. "I think it would be much better if you wore my old wedding gown. It's elegant, timeless, a real family heirloom. Everyone will adore it." I could almost hear her smiling, as if she'd just done me the greatest favor of my life. I don't remember what I said to end that call. Maybe nothing. I just remember sitting there, the phone still pressed to my ear after she hung up. My heart pounding so hard I could hear it echo in my chest. It wasn't about the dress anymore. It was about control. It was about her need to own every part of this wedding, to mold it into her fantasy of the perfect day, even if it meant erasing me from it completely. That night, as I stared at the sketch of my mother's design, I realized that this woman, the one who was supposed to become family, didn't just want to be part of my wedding. She wanted to be the wedding. And that was the moment I knew I was in for a battle I hadn't signed up for. Before all of this, before the wedding chaos and the tears and the phone calls that made my blood pressure rise, things seemed peaceful, normal. Even Tom and I had been together for 4 years when he proposed. He did it on a quiet evening in our backyard, under the string lights we'd hung together the first summer we moved in. It wasn't flashy or performative. It was intimate, genuine, and completely us. That's the man I fell in love with. Thoughtful, grounded, and a little shy. He had this calmness about him that balanced out my tendency to overthink. We didn't fight often, and when we did, it was over small things. Who forgot to buy milk? whose turn it was to fold laundry. The kind of arguments that end in laughter 5 minutes later. If only I had known that wedding planning would reveal a side of his family I was wildly unprepared for. Because the moment the engagement ring was on my finger, Linda stepped out of the shadows like she'd been waiting for the cue. At first, she was all smiles and hugs, calling me sweetheart and telling everyone how thrilled she was that I'd be joining the family. She hosted a little engagement dinner at her house, complete with champagne and those expensive hors d'oeuvres you can't pronounce. I remember thinking, she's intense, but she means well. That illusion didn't last long. Within a week, she was texting me every morning. I've been thinking, ivory would wash you out. Maybe champagne tones? Don't book the florist yet. I know someone better. Oh, honey, you're not really going with that venue, are you? It's fine, but it's not. US. At first, I laughed it off. I figured she was just excited. Tom's dad had passed years earlier, and I thought maybe this was her way of feeling included, of reliving something happy. But then it started to shift. Every decision I made, from the menu to the bridesmaids' dresses, somehow became a debate. I'd say I wanted something simple, and she'd counter with, oh, but people will think we're cheap. I'd show her a color palette, and she'd wrinkle her nose like she'd just smelled spoiled milk. Still, I kept trying. I told myself, she's just old-fashioned. I didn't want to be that bride who fights with her future in-laws over trivial things. Tom, bless him, tried to play peacemaker. When I'd vent to him, he'd sigh and say, she just wants to help. Babe, you know how she is. Yes, I did. I knew exactly how she was. Linda was the kind of woman who thrived on control. Everything in her world had to fit her version of perfection. Her house looked like something out of a catalog. All white, all polished, nothing out of place. Even her dog wore a little designer collar. And in her mind, my wedding was just another project to perfect. The more I pushed back, the tighter her grip seemed to get. I'd politely decline her suggestions, and she'd respond with a long sigh followed by, well, it's your day, dear. I just hope you don't regret it. It was passive-aggressive mastery. Looking back now, there were so many warning signs. The way she always introduced me to her friends as Tom's fiancée, never by my name. The way she'd slip in little comments about how family reputation mattered more than personal taste, or how she once joked that the bride is just one part of the show. The guests remember the mother of the groom, too. I thought she was just being vain. I didn't realize she was preparing to take over. When my mom passed away a few years earlier, I'd quietly decided that I wanted my wedding dress to carry part of her memory. Her old friend, Marisol, was a seamstress who had kept some of my mother's favorite fabrics. Delicate lace trims, silk pieces she never used. We started designing a dress that blended modern elegance with little details. That reminded me of her. Linda knew that. I'd told her about it during one of our early planning talks, hoping she'd see how meaningful it was to me. She smiled then, that kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes, and said, how sentimental. I suppose that's sweet. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now, I realize that was the moment she decided to change the story to her. My custom dress wasn't touching or symbolic. It was a threat, a reminder that I had a family history, a woman to honor, someone other than her to be remembered that day. And when she saw that she couldn't control the design, she did the only thing she knew how to do. She tried to eliminate it. That was the world I was living in before the real storm hit. One where every decision came with a sigh, every choice with a judgment, and every moment of joy with a quiet, invisible tug of disapproval. And then, one afternoon, that invisible tug turned into a full-blown yank, because Linda didn't just want to influence the wedding anymore. She wanted to own it, and I was about to find out just how far she was willing to go. It was a bright Saturday morning when the line was finally crossed. The moment Linda went from difficult to unforgivable. I remember it so vividly because it started like any other day of wedding prep. I was sipping coffee in the kitchen, still in my robe, reviewing a message from Marisol, my seamstress. She'd sent me photos of the fabric swatches we'd finalized, along with a note that said, "Ready to start the final cut this week. Can't wait for your fitting." I smiled. After months of sketches, fittings, and revisions, the dress was finally becoming real. A small, private triumph. I was planning to meet Marisol that afternoon to go over the lace details. The same lace my mother had handpicked years ago. But then my phone buzzed again. It was Marisol. This time, her tone was different, hesitant. "Sweetheart," she said softly. "I just wanted to confirm. Did you want to cancel the order?" I froze. "Cancel?" "Yes," she said carefully. "Your fiancé's mother called me yesterday. She said you'd changed your mind, that you'd decided to wear her wedding dress instead." For a second, I couldn't breathe. My heart thudded in my chest as her words sank in. I stood there, gripping the counter, staring at the sunlight on the kitchen tiles. "She said what?" "She sounded very sure," Marisol replied, clearly uneasy. "She said she was calling on your behalf. I told her I needed your confirmation, but she insisted you were busy and didn't want to waste time." I felt the heat rise to my face. My hands were trembling so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. I thanked Marisol for not doing anything without my word and hung up, my mind already racing. Linda. She'd actually done it. She'd taken it upon herself to cancel the one thing that mattered most to me. Not because she cared, but because she couldn't control it. I paced the kitchen for a full minute, trying to calm myself. I told myself to breathe, to think before reacting. But before I could even form a plan, my phone lit up again. This time, it was Linda herself. "Hi, dear," she chirped, her voice as bright as sunlight through glass. "I just wanted to let you know I spoke to Marisol. We're going to save you a fortune, trust me. You'll thank me later." I could hear her smiling. That fake, condescending smile that always made my stomach twist. "You what?" I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I canceled the order, sweetheart," she continued breezily. "You're too emotional about this whole custom dress thing. It's just a dress. Besides, I have the perfect solution. My gown. It's classic. It's timeless. And it's our family's history." "Linda," I said, every word measured. "You had no right to do that." She laughed lightly, as if I were being dramatic. "Oh, don't be silly. You'll understand once you see it. You can't buy class, dear. And that dress of yours." She trailed off with a soft hum, the implication hanging in the air. It wasn't just about taste. She was telling me I didn't belong. I could feel my pulse in my ears. "You had no right," I repeated, this time louder. Her tone changed instantly, the sweetness turning sharp. "You're marrying my son, which means you're becoming part of my family. And I won't have you embarrassing us with some sentimental project dress." End of discussion. And just like that, she hung up. I stood there, staring at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone, my chest heaving. I couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to me that way, like I was a child being scolded for coloring outside the lines. The humiliation came first. followed quickly by a cold, simmering anger. This wasn't about money. It wasn't even about fashion. This was about control, pure, deliberate control. Linda had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Later that day, I met with Marisol in person. When she saw my expression, she just shook her head and said, "I've worked with people like her before. Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll keep going. She can't stop us if we don't let her." I smiled weakly, grateful. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. When I got home that night, Tom was sitting on the couch watching TV. I told him what happened, every word. He looked stunned, then sighed heavily. "I'll talk to her," he said finally. "She means well, she just gets carried away." That was his answer. The same tired line. And in that moment, I realized something painful. If I wanted to stop Linda, I couldn't rely on anyone else to do it for me. That was the night I drew my first invisible boundary. One I knew she'd test, push, and eventually shatter again. But at least now, I saw her clearly. This wasn't about a meddling mother-in-law anymore. This was about a woman who couldn't stand the idea of losing control, and a bride who was finally ready to stop letting her win. If I thought canceling my dress was the worst Linda could do, I was painfully mistaken. That moment wasn't her final play, it was merely her opening move in the weeks that followed. It was as if she'd declared silent war. She began calling vendors behind my back. I'd find out days later that the florist I'd chosen was no longer available, or that the caterer had to adjust their menu. Each time I investigated, the story was the same. Linda had called them personally. She'd told them she was handling the wedding details and that I had changed my mind. It was mortifying. I remember one call with the bakery in particular. I'd spent hours tasting cakes, finally settling on a simple 3-tier design vanilla sponge with fresh strawberries, just like the one my parents had at their wedding. When I phoned to confirm our deposit, the manager sounded confused. "Oh, we spoke to your coordinator already," he said. "My coordinator?" I repeated. "Yes, Mrs. Williams, your fiance's mother. She said you'd decided on the fondant-covered design instead. She also switched the filling to chocolate mousse." I nearly dropped the phone. I managed to thank him and hang up before the tears came. It wasn't just a cake. It was my wedding slowly being rewritten, detail by detail, into something unrecognizable. When I confronted Linda, she smiled sweetly and said, "You're welcome. The strawberry filling was so childish, dear. This way, people will take it seriously." Her condescension was breathtaking. I stared at her across her perfectly polished dining table, the light catching her diamond bracelet as she poured herself tea, like we were discussing the weather. "You can't just change things without asking me," I said quietly. "I can when you're making mistakes," she replied, looking utterly unfazed. "You're too close to it all to make objective choices. I'm saving you from embarrassment." Her words hit me like a slap. Saving me from embarrassment. And Tom, he was caught in the middle, too afraid to challenge her and too passive to defend me. Every time I tried to talk to him, he'd rub the back of his neck and mutter, "She's just excited. Don't let it get to you." But it was getting to me. Deeply. I stopped sleeping properly. I'd wake up at 2 a.m., my mind racing through vendor lists, trying to figure out what else she might have tampered with. Every email I sent felt like a small act of defense, an attempt to reclaim even 1 inch of control. Linda, meanwhile, was thriving. She'd started calling herself the wedding coordinator. She even had the nerve to send out an email to the bridal party, introducing herself as the main point of contact for all major decisions. The bridesmaids were confused. My maid of honor was furious, and I was just tired. So tired. But Linda wasn't done. A week later, she found a new way to hurt me. She began spreading stories among the guests' little lies, wrapped in polite gossip. A cousin of Tom's pulled me aside one afternoon and asked, "So, you really decided to wear Linda's dress? That's so sweet of you to honor tradition." I felt my stomach drop. What? "Oh, she told everyone," the cousin said, smiling. "She said you fell in love with it after all." My vision blurred. It was one thing to meddle with the wedding logistics, but this was rewriting my narrative. The story people would tell about my day, my dress, my moment. I went home shaking. That night, I told Tom again what was happening. "She's making me look like I don't have a voice," I said, my voice cracking. "She's making it her wedding." He sat on the edge of the bed, his face drawn. "I know," he said finally. "I'll talk to her tomorrow." But the conversation never happened, because by morning, Linda had already found a new way to escalate things. I got an email from our venue manager, politely confirming a new ceremony time when I had never approved. When I called, he said, "Your future mother-in-law requested the change. Said you were having scheduling conflicts." That was the moment I realized something crucial. Linda wasn't chaotic. She was strategic. Every move she made was deliberate, methodical, designed to wear me down until I'd surrender just to stop the stress. And she was winning. I began to dread answering my phone. Every notification brought a new problem, a new twist. My excitement for the wedding had vanished completely. What should have been a season of joy had turned into a daily struggle for control. But there was still a small, stubborn part of me that refused to let her win. I told myself, "She's not taking this from me. Not my dress, not my story, not my wedding." And though I didn't know it yet, that small spark of defiance was about to ignite something much bigger, because Linda's next stunt would push me far beyond the point of patience. It would become the moment I stopped being her victim and started becoming her lesson. It's strange how calm moments can hide the storms they're about to unleash. 2 weeks before the wedding, things had quieted just enough that I started to hope Linda was finally letting go. There hadn't been any new updates from her. No unexpected calls from vendors. No whispered rumors from guests. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe. That fragile peace lasted exactly 3 days. Marisol had called to say my dress was ready for its final fitting. The moment I'd been waiting for. I could barely contain my excitement. I hadn't even seen the finished piece yet, but I knew what it represented. The end of all the chaos. The one thing Linda couldn't rewrite. The fitting was supposed to be private. Just me and Marisol. A quiet afternoon filled with delicate fabric and happy tears. I drove to the studio humming to myself, trying to push the stress away. But when I walked through the door, my heart dropped. Linda was already there. She stood near the mirrors, clutching a garment bag. Her lips pursed in that familiar expression. Half smile, half judgment. "Oh, good. You're here," she said cheerfully, as if she hadn't just invaded the one sacred space I had left. "I brought my wedding gown. I thought you could try it on today. You know, for photos." I froze. "How did you even know about this fitting?" "Tom mentioned it," she said casually. "And really, dear, you should be thanking me. This is tradition. Generations of Williams women have worn this gown. You don't want to break that, do you?" I looked at her, at the ivory lace spilling out of the bag, the smug tilt of her chin, and for a moment, I couldn't find words. Marisol glanced at me, uncertain, her hands tightening around the measuring tape at her waist. She'd seen enough by now to know trouble when it walked in. "Linda," I said finally, keeping my voice even, "this fitting is for my dress. The one I designed. I'm not wearing yours." Her smile faltered for just a second before she regrouped. "You're being emotional again, sweetheart. Don't ruin this moment. Here, just try it on. For me." I took a deep breath, the kind that tastes like control, bitter and necessary. "No." The word hung in the air, sharper than I intended. Linda blinked, clearly not used to hearing it. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated, stronger this time. "I'm not wearing your gown. I didn't ask you to come here, and you have no right to be part of this fitting." Her face changed. The warmth vanished, replaced by a cold, cutting glare. "You ungrateful girl," she hissed, her voice dropping the polished veneer she always wore. "After everything I've done for you? I have been trying to save you from embarrassing yourself, and this is how you repay me." I could feel the heat creeping up my neck, my pulse pounding in my ears. Marisol stepped back, pretending to adjust a mannequin, but her eyes flickered between us. "I didn't ask you to save me," I said, "and you haven't done me any favors." Linda scoffed, clutching the garment bag tighter. "If you don't wear this dress, I won't be attending your wedding. I refuse to be part of a family farce. Everyone will know you're just some—" She caught herself, but not before the venom slipped through. "Somewhat," I wanted to ask. "Some girl who doesn't fit your idea of class. Some woman who dares to stand up to you." But I didn't need to say it. Her silence answered for her. When she realized I wasn't backing down, she let out a harsh laugh. "Fine," she snapped. "Do whatever you want. But don't come crying to me when people talk. Because they will, dear. They always do." And with that, she turned and stormed out, her heels clicking across the tile like a metronome of contempt. The door slammed, leaving the room buzzing with the echo of everything she'd said. I stood there for a moment, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. From fury, from exhaustion, from months of swallowing every insult and pretending it didn't hurt. Marisol walked over quietly and touched my shoulder. "You handled that with more grace than she deserved," she said gently. I smiled faintly, but it didn't reach my eyes. Grace isn't working anymore. For the rest of the fitting, we worked in near silence. But my mind wasn't on the dress. It was spinning with thoughts, memories, and one growing certainty. Linda wasn't going to stop. Not until I stopped her. That confrontation was the final straw. The moment the scales tipped. I drove home with my jaw clenched so tight it hurt, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. When I got home, Tom was there, waiting in the living room. "How did the fitting go?" he asked, smiling. I just stared at him. "Your mother showed up." His smile faded. "What? How? You told her about it," I said quietly. "Didn't you?" He hesitated. "She just asked." I cut him off with a sharp breath. "Tom, she threatened not to come to our wedding if I don't wear her dress." He blinked, processing. "She didn't mean that. She's dramatic sometimes." "Stop." My voice cracked. "Do you have any idea what it's been like? Every day, she undermines me, humiliates me, and you just let it happen. I can't do this anymore." He sat there, speechless. For once, I think he finally saw what I'd been feeling all along. The slow, suffocating erosion of my joy. "I'm not fighting her anymore," I said, my tone calm now, almost eerily so. "I'm ending this, one way or another." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, standing tall, It's my wedding, and it's time she learned what that actually means. That night, for the first time since the engagement began, I didn't cry. I didn't rant. I didn't vent. I just sat quietly at the kitchen table, a notebook in front of me, and started planning, because if Linda wanted a war, I was finally ready to give her one. And this time, I'd make sure she never saw the ending coming. The notebook I'd started that night sat open on the table. A messy map of grievances, names, and phone numbers. I underlined "no more passive" 3 times and closed it before the dawn. That resolve was still warm the next day when life, strangely, handed me the one thing I hadn't known I needed. Proof. It was a mundane little thing at first. An automated confirmation from the venue that I'd asked the planner to forward. I was cross-checking dates, as I'd been doing for weeks, when I noticed another message threaded beneath it. The subject line was the same, but the tone of the email was different. There was a short reply from the venue manager, and then a forwarded note from Linda. I almost scrolled past it. I was used to surprise emails, but something made me stop and read it. She hadn't just called. She'd emailed, and in her haste, or arrogance, she'd CC'd me. The email thread was a little time capsule. Timestamps, polite salutations, and the kind of offhand authority she always adopted when talking to people she considered beneath her. She was confirming a change in ceremony time, requesting the caterer swap our menu, and insisting the floral arrangement be replaced with a more appropriate color palette. What made my stomach drop was the clarity of it. She'd told the venues she was handling everything and assumed everyone would follow her lead. Worse, she'd implied I'd asked her to. There it was, plain as day, in black and white, the rewriting of my wedding plan. I read it 3 times, my chest tightening with a cold, precise rage. This was not hearsay. This was not rumor passed at cocktail hour. This was documentation. Names, dates, requests, and a signature. Evidence. For a long time after my mother died, I'd collected small things of hers. Buttons, a handwritten note in a box, the swatch of lace she'd once said was too pretty to cut. When I worked with Marisol on the dress, we'd used those remnants the way a grieving heart uses memory, to stitch a new future out of what remained. But this email was something else entirely. It shifted the terrain. It made Linda's meddling no longer a matter of bad manners or bullying. It made it deliberate, traceable, and, crucially, reversible. I sat very still for a while, the warmth of my coffee forgotten. The plan that formed wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a public takedown or a spectacle. It was a strategy built on small, practical moves that would deny her the tools she'd been using all along: access and plausible deniability. Step 1 was obvious. I printed the email. Holding that single sheet of paper felt simultaneously childish and empowering. Childish because I could have forwarded it or shown it on my phone, but there was something tactile about having it in my hand. A cold, solid thing that said, "You were wronged, and here is why." Empowering because it meant I could stop reacting and start deciding. Next, I called Marisol. I drove to her studio with the email in an envelope, and when she opened it, she didn't gasp so much as fold her lips into a hard line. Of course she would do that, she said. People like her always think they can rewrite other people's lives. We'll keep the dress ready. No one's touching it without you. Her calm gave me a little more courage. From there I moved to the vendors. Quietly, deliberately. I scheduled private conversations with the florist, the baker, and the venue manager. I didn't accuse anyone out loud. Instead, I showed them the email and asked one very simple question. Can you honor what we originally agreed on and only take direction from me or the planner I appoint. Each one signed off without drama. They'd been confused and embarrassed by Linda's calls. Once they saw the timeline, they were eager to correct the record. Many of them said the same thing. They'd assumed she was an authorized contact because she spoke with confidence. Once we clarified authorization, they were relieved to have direction from someone who actually wanted their services. I also went to the planner. I had never felt closer to a professional ally than I did that afternoon. She leaned over my kitchen counter, laptop open, and mapped out the practicalities. Change passwords on booking portals, set up a vendor-only line, and create a single email address for wedding communications that vendors would trust. We drafted a short, polite template that the planner would send to all vendors, a confirmation that moving forward, only the planner or myself would make changes. Any other requests should be directed to that single account for verification. The planner added a line about penalties for unauthorized changes. It was sterile and effective, a prophylactic against further meddling. Through all of this, I was careful. I didn't want the war to become louder than the wedding itself. I didn't want to humiliate Tom or force him into an impossible loyalty test. So I brought him in on the plan in a measured way. He had to witness the email, read the thread, and decide where he stood. Watching him scroll through those messages was like watching him read the anatomy of a betrayal. He looked both ashamed and stunned. "I'm sorry," he said finally, voice small. "I should have seen this sooner." He meant it. For the first time, he seemed to understand how passive acceptance had enabled Linda. He agreed to do something he should have done earlier. Set a boundary with his mother. We agreed on to things then. He would have a conversation with his mother, but not before the vendors were secured, and the planner had sent the official emails. The last thing I wanted was for Linda to have an opening to claim she'd been misunderstood, or to charm her way back into the logistical loop. I wanted her reaction to be to facts, not to rhetoric. Facts, after all, are difficult to spin. There was also another piece to the plan I hadn't realized would matter until later: secrecy. If Linda suspected that I had evidence, she might immediately become more covert, find new ways to sabotage, or simply escalate. So for now, the email lived in a locked drawer and in the heads of a very small circle. Marisol, the planner, Tom, and me. We moved like a quiet, efficient team dismantling a machine. But the unique weapon was more than a printed email. It was the insight that came with it. That Linda had relied upon the appearance of authority, more than actual authority. If we removed that appearance, she would be left with nothing but attitude. So we removed it. We changed contact emails, informed vendors, and made sure contracts reflected who had the right to authorize changes. We also started documenting everything. Every phone call with a vendor from that point on was followed by a confirmation email. Every change required written approval. I wasn't just protecting my wedding. I was building a paper trail. There was a tiny, deliciously ironic detail to the plan I kept to myself. While Linda had thought she could erase my mother's presence by canceling the dress, she'd actually made me double-check every scrap of fabric and every memory we'd planned to sew into the gown. Marisol and I found a way to use the very things Linda scoffed at, a frayed cuff, an old lace trim, and weave them into something far more beautiful than a mere family heirloom. It would be a dress that belonged to both past and future, and no amount of interference could change that when everything was in place. Vendor confirmation sent, the planner's email circulated, passwords updated. I sat down with a cup of tea and allowed myself a long, quiet breath. The spark of defiance that had driven me to sketch and underlined in that notebook was no longer just stubbornness. It had become methodical resolve. I knew exactly what I was doing and why. I also knew that this was not about humiliating Linda for sport. It was about preserving the day that marked the beginning of my marriage, not the continuation of someone else's ego. And beneath all practicalities, a softer thing had happened. I felt my confidence return. It was a steady, quiet warmth, like a hand at the small of my back as I walked forward. I could imagine the dress hanging in Marisol's studio, whole and waiting, not as evidence of a fight, but as proof of something that had outlived a selfish attempt to erase it. Linda had given me the weapon without realizing it. In her rush to control, she left a paper trail. I intended to use it to protect what was mine, not with spectacle, but with the clean, unromantic power of documentation, boundaries, and allies who were ready to stand with me. That night I closed the notebook again, but this time my pen hovered over a new line I added in small, steady letters. Make the day ours. No more rewrites. Asterisk. The morning of the wedding dawned calm and gold, the kind of light that softens everything it touches. It felt unreal after months of chaos. I woke before my alarm, lying still for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, waiting for nerves to come. They didn't. Instead, there was a quiet certainty humming through me. Everything that could be done had been done. Linda thought she still had control, and that was the beauty of it. The week leading up to the wedding had been suspiciously silent on her end. No phone calls, no demands, no suggestions. She'd convinced herself I'd back down, that her threats had finally worked. I let her believe it. When she'd smugly told Tom over dinner that she was glad we came to our senses, and that she looked forward to seeing her dress shine again, I'd simply smiled and said nothing. It was almost poetic, the way she was walking right into her own undoing. The venue, a restored garden estate, looked exactly as I dreamed. Ivory roses, muted green vines, simple candlelit arrangements, everything elegant, understated. The planner had worked miracles behind the scenes, making sure every vendor followed the final instructions sent through the secure channel. I'd confirmed each one myself. There would be no last-minute corrections from Linda. But the centerpiece of it all, the true heart of my plan, hung waiting in Marisol's garment bag, my wedding gown, my real gown. It was nothing like Linda's dated family relic. It was soft and modern, made from layers of silk chiffon and lace salvaged from my mother's old gown. The very lace Linda had sneered at for being too sentimental. Marisol had woven it delicately into the bodice, each stitch a quiet defiance. From afar, it looked like any couture design. Up close, it whispered of love, memory, and resilience. And hidden inside the inner lining, sewn with silver thread, was something else. A message embroidered in my mother's handwriting. I'd given Marisol an old note she'd once written me. Be brave, my girl. Those words now rested against my heart. I couldn't have asked for a better shield. Linda arrived an hour before the ceremony, wearing an expression that could only be described as royal satisfaction. She swept into the bridal suite like a queen inspecting her kingdom, her champagne-colored dress glinting under the light. Well, she said brightly, eyes flicking to the unopened garment bag. You came to your senses, I see. Is my dress ready? Marisol, bless her, was folding ribbon in the corner. She didn't so much as flinch. I smiled, serene. Oh, it's ready. Wonderful, Linda said. I was worried you might have tried something unnecessary. I wouldn't dream of it, I said. She nodded approvingly, completely unaware that her own downfall was neatly hanging behind me. As she left to check on the guests, I caught Marisol's eye in the mirror. She grinned. "You're wicked," she whispered. "Just patient," I murmured when the ceremony began. Everything unfolded in perfect precision. The music swelled. The guests stood. And then, the moment I'd been waiting for. The doors opened. I stepped out in my dress. There was a collective gasp. For a second, the entire garden went silent except for the faint rustle of the wind. Then whispers rippled through the crowd. Admiration, surprise, wonder. I could feel eyes on me, feel the warmth of that silence break into smiles. The sun caught the lace in just the right way, turning it to liquid light. But the best part was Linda's face. From where I stood at the end of the aisle, I could see her in the front row, frozen mid-smile. Her expression shifted in slow motion, from pride to confusion to horror. Her lips parted as if she couldn't quite process what she was seeing. Because she recognized the lace. She knew, instantly, that it wasn't her dress. And worse, she recognized the faint pattern, the vintage lace she'd mocked, the one she'd said was too emotional. She knew. Her hand flew to her chest. I swear I saw her whisper something to herself. Maybe disbelief, maybe outrage. Tom's hand brushed mine as I reached the altar, steady and warm. But I didn't need it. I was steady all on my own as the officiant began to speak. I caught Linda's gaze once more. This time, I didn't look away. After the ceremony, the truth unfolded like a domino chain she couldn't stop. The guests couldn't stop talking about the gown, the story, the beauty, the meaning. Marisol, of course, explained it perfectly when someone asked. The lace was from her late mother's gown, she said with a smile. It's something old and something new, all in one. It spread. Within an hour, Linda's version of tradition had been replaced with a much more touching one. One that didn't include her. I didn't need to humiliate her publicly. The elegance of the truth did that for me. She couldn't say a word without looking petty, because to protest would be to admit she'd tried to erase my mother's memory in the first place. And that was the beauty of karma. It didn't always need a loud victory. Sometimes it was quiet, graceful, inevitable. As the reception began, Linda avoided me. She sat stiffly, smiling through gritted teeth as guests gushed about the most beautiful wedding they'd ever attended. When one of her friends said, "Oh, it's so meaningful that she wore her mother's lace instead of that old family dress," I watched the color drain from her face. Meanwhile, I danced. For the first time in months, I danced freely, laughing with Tom, twirling under the fairy lights, feeling the fabric move with me, my mother's lace glinting like memory. Linda had wanted me to walk down that aisle wearing her past. Instead, I'd walked into my future wearing mine, and she'd handed me the power to do it without even realizing it. When the night ended, I found a quiet corner to breathe it all in. The music fading, laughter echoing, the scent of roses in the air. I'd done it, no shouting, no confrontation, just justice, clean and poetic. The plan had worked flawlessly. But the best part wasn't that Linda lost. It was that I finally felt like I'd won. Not the argument, but myself. The reception was in full swing when Linda's mask finally cracked. She'd managed to keep it together through most of dinner, smiling stiffly for photos, clinking glasses, pretending she wasn't simmering inside. But I could see the tension in her hands, the way she gripped her champagne flute just a little too tightly, the smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was the only one in the room who wasn't celebrating. I knew she'd snap eventually, and I was right. It happened just after the father-daughter dance, or rather, the mother-daughter tribute I'd planned in my mother's honor. I'd arranged for a short slideshow to play while a song she used to hum filled the air. Photos of her, Her wedding day, her laugh, her arms around a much younger me, flickered softly on the screen. It was beautiful, gentle, emotional, but for Linda, it was intolerable. The moment it ended, she excused herself from the table and marched straight toward me, her heels clicking like gunshots across the marble floor. Guests nearby noticed, their conversations faltering as she approached. She leaned in close, her smile tight and her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You just couldn't help yourself, could you?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" She lowered her voice, though not enough to keep it private, parading her in front of everyone like that, as if you needed to remind them this isn't your real family. "You humiliated me, Julia." Her words hit with that familiar sting, but this time they didn't stick. I looked at her, calm and steady. "I honored my mother. You're the only one who seems offended by that." Her eyes flared. "Don't play innocent with me. You lied to everyone. You promised you'd wear my gown." "I never promised you anything," I said evenly. "You assumed. There's a difference." That did it. The composure she'd worked so hard to maintain shattered like glass. Her voice rose, sharp enough to slice through the music. "You made a mockery of this family. You've embarrassed my son, and you've embarrassed me." A few nearby guests turned, whispering. Tom was already making his way toward us, confusion and worry written all over his face. I took a slow breath, keeping my tone soft but unflinching. "No, Linda, the only person embarrassed here is you. Because for once, you didn't get to control the story." She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't quite process that I'd spoken to her that way. Tom arrived then, placing a hand gently on my back. "Mom, what's going on?" Linda whirled on him. "You knew. You let her do this." "Mom," he said quietly, glancing at the guests who were now pretending not to watch. "You need to stop." "Stop," she hissed. "She's been disrespectful since day one." "Enough," he said, his voice low but firm, a tone I'd never heard him use with her before. "You've done enough." The words hung there. For a second, she froze, staring at him as though he'd spoken a foreign language. He took her arm gently but firmly. "Go home, Mom, please." Her face twisted, disbelief giving way to wounded pride. "You're choosing her over your own mother?" "I'm choosing peace," he said quietly. "And if you loved me, you'd understand why." For a long, taut second, no one moved. Then Linda jerked her arm free, her breath sharp with fury. "You'll regret this," she spat. "Both of you." And with that, she turned and stormed out, past the tables, past the guests, past the murmurs that followed her like a trail of whispers. The door shut behind her, muffling the noise, and the air felt lighter almost instantly. Tom let out a long breath, rubbing his temples. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have stood up to her a long time ago." I reached for his hand. "You did it when it mattered." He looked at me, tired, but relieved. "She's not going to take this well." "I know," I said, smiling softly. "But maybe that's the point." The rest of the night went on without her shadow. Guests returned to dancing, the laughter returned to the air, and I felt something I hadn't in months. Genuine joy. There was no more pretense, no more tightrope to walk. Just us, messy, human, imperfect, celebrating something real every now and then. I caught snippets of conversation from guests. "Did you see her dress? Absolutely stunning." "I heard the lace was her mother's." "How beautiful is that?" "I don't blame her for not wearing the Mills gown." Can you imagine? It wasn't gossip. It was understanding. The kind that comes when people witness quiet courage. And I didn't need to gloat. Karma had already handled that part for me. Linda's downfall wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, humiliating, and poetic. In trying so hard to make the wedding about herself, she ended up exiling herself from it completely. Her arrogance had written her own ending. And for the first time, I realized something powerful. I hadn't just defended my wedding day. I'd reclaimed my voice. As the night wound down, I slipped outside for a moment, standing beneath the fairy lights. The air was cool, perfumed with roses and rain. Inside, laughter echoed, soft and distant. It was over, and I had one. Not because I'd outsmarted her, but because I'd stayed true to myself. The morning after the wedding. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, soft and golden. The kind that feels like a clean start. Tom was still asleep beside me, his breathing steady. I lay there for a moment, letting the quiet sink in. No more lists, no more anxiety, no more waiting for the next storm. For the first time in months, there was peace. But peace doesn't always last long. Not when someone like Linda is involved. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed with a message from our wedding planner. "Good morning, Julia. Just wanted you to know that everything went beautifully. Oh, and small heads up. Your mill contacted the venue this morning. Don't worry, we handled it." I couldn't help but smile. Of course she had. Curiosity got the better of me. So I called the planner. Her voice was half amused, half exasperated. She tried to tell the manager that the wrong dress had been worn, she said. Claimed there was a miscommunication, and that you'd worn the incorrect gown. I laughed. Did she now? She even said she'd demand a partial refund because the decor wasn't what she approved. The planner continued. So I forwarded her the vendor authorization forms. The ones with your name and signature only. "Oh, no," I said, suppressing a grin. "You didn't." "Oh, I absolutely did," she replied. And I copied her email to every vendor involved, just for transparency. I pictured it. Linda sitting at her kitchen table, staring at a chain of receipts, contracts, and confirmations that proved she hadn't been in control of a single thing. The planner went on. By the time she saw the thread, the venue manager had already replied, "Thanking you for being so professional and easy to work with. It's safe to say her reputation with them won't recover anytime soon." I thanked her, still smiling when I hung up. That was the real moment of payoff. Not the dress. Not even the wedding itself. It was knowing that every thread of Linda's manipulation had been neatly undone by her own arrogance. She'd tried to meddle so deeply that she left fingerprints everywhere. Now, those fingerprints were proof of everything she'd done. And the irony? She'd given me all the evidence herself. Later that afternoon, Tom's phone rang. It was Linda. He put it on speaker, his expression unreadable. "Thomas," she began, her tone sharp but shaky. "You need to fix this. I just got a very rude email from your wedding planner. She's making me look like a fool." Tom exhaled slowly. "Mom, you did that yourself." "Excuse me? You interfered in everything," he said calmly. "The venue, the dress, the menu, everything. And now you're surprised people know? Actions have consequences. Mom," her voice broke slightly. "I was only trying to help. You've embarrassed me in front of everyone. Do you have any idea what people will say?" "I think," he said, his tone steady, "they'll say it was a beautiful wedding, and that it went exactly the way it should have, without your interference." There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then, quietly, "I see how it is." She hung up. Tom set his phone down, rubbing his forehead. "That's probably the last time she calls for a while." "Good," I said softly. Maybe it's time she learns that control isn't love. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. You were incredible yesterday. You know that. I smiled. I just finally stopped playing her game. That evening, after the chaos of cleanup and farewells, I went to hang my wedding gown in its box. As I smoothed the fabric and traced the lace with my fingers, my eyes caught the faint silver embroidery on the inside of the bodice. Be brave, my girl, I whispered. I was, Mom. Asterisk. For a moment, I imagined her there, proud, radiant, laughing the way she used to. I realized then that the wedding wasn't just about getting married. It was about reclaiming everything I'd let others take from me. My voice, my joy, my story. Linda had tried to erase my mother's presence, to turn my wedding into her own stage. Instead, she'd ended up erasing herself from it. That was justice. Quiet, clean, poetic. Weeks later, I heard through Tom's cousin that Linda had tried to tell her version of the story, about how I betrayed family tradition and wore the wrong gown. But by then, everyone had seen the photos online. The gown, the lace, the tribute to my mother. It was being shared, praised, even written about in a local bridal blog that titled the feature, "A Daughter's Love Woven into Her Wedding." Her gossip was drowned out by admiration. And that, I realized, was karma's final touch. Linda had wanted everyone to remember her family's legacy. Instead, they remembered mine. That night, as I stood on our porch watching the stars, I felt the deep, satisfying stillness that comes after justice has settled. I'd fought back not with cruelty, but with clarity. I'd let her dig her own grave with her own arrogance, and when the dust cleared, I simply walked forward, unbothered, unbroken, and beautifully free, because in the end, the best revenge isn't anger, it's peace. And I finally had mine. Asterisk, it's been almost a year since that unforgettable wedding day. And sometimes, when I look back, it feels like I'm remembering a story that happened to someone else. But then I catch sight of my wedding gown, carefully stored in its ivory box, and I'm reminded that it was me. I really did live through all of that, and I came out stronger, wiser, and far more grounded in who I am. The months following the wedding were a strange mixture of peace and quiet fallout at first. Linda went silent. For someone who loved being in control of every conversation, that silence was deafening and, honestly, a little unsettling. I knew her too well to believe she'd just moved on. Sure enough, a few weeks later, she made one last attempt to reclaim her narrative. She invited Tom and me over for dinner. To make amends, against my better judgment, we went, partly for Tom's sake, partly because I wanted closure. When we arrived, the table was beautifully set, the candles flickering just so, but the tension was immediate. She barely looked at me. Her tone was polite, clipped. After the meal, she finally addressed it. I just wanted to say, she began, her eyes on her wine glass, that I was surprised by how things turned out. I suppose I misjudged a few things. I held my breath. Waiting, she went on. You made a beautiful bride, Julia. I'll give you that. It wasn't exactly an apology, but I could tell, for her, it was the closest thing I'd ever get, so I smiled, gently. Thank you, Linda. That means a lot. And that was that, from that day forward. Our relationship changed. Not magically, not dramatically, but in a quiet, measurable way. The balance shifted. She no longer questioned my decisions. She no longer spoke over me when we planned holidays or family events. I think she finally understood. I wasn't her project to manage. More importantly, Tom had seen everything with his own eyes. He'd watched her manipulation unfold and crumble. It forced him to confront the truth about his mother, something he'd been avoiding his entire life. Our marriage grew stronger because of it. We learned how to set boundaries together. He began calling her out when she crossed lines, not in anger, but with calm certainty. That, in turn, made her start to reflect, slowly, begrudgingly, but genuinely. Sometimes, karma doesn't strike like lightning. Sometimes it arrives like a quiet echo, repeating the lessons people refuse to learn until they finally listen. A few months later, Tom and I took a small weekend trip to the coast. One evening, while we were walking along the beach, he turned to me and said, "You know, Mom still talks about that wedding sometimes." I laughed softly. "I bet she does." "Yeah," he said. "But the funny thing is, now she tells people how thoughtful the tribute to your mom was. She's proud of it, like she had something to do with it." I smiled at the horizon. Let her. It's better that way, because that's the beauty of true justice. It doesn't always have to humiliate. Sometimes, the most poetic form of it is letting the truth stand so firmly that it rewrites itself into their memory. Linda can tell herself whatever story helps her sleep at night. I know the truth, and so does everyone else. As for me, I kept that secret second dress sketch, the one my mother made years ago, framed above my desk. It's a reminder not just of her love, but of the power of trusting my own instincts. If there's one thing I've learned through it all, it's this: people will always try to test your boundaries. They'll disguise control as care, manipulation as tradition, and domination as help. But if you stay quiet long enough, they'll start believing you're powerless, until the day you stop playing their game. That's when the story changes. Every so often, I still get messages from guests who attended the wedding. Some say it was the most emotional ceremony they'd ever seen. Others mention the look on Linda's face when I walked down the aisle. Equal parts shock and awe. I don't gloat when I read those messages. I simply smile, because it's not about revenge anymore. It's about peace, real, earned peace. And as strange as it sounds, I think that day was the start of a new kind of family. Imperfect, fragile, but grounded in truth. The woman I was before that wedding, timid, eager to please, afraid to offend, she's gone. In her place stands someone who knows her worth. Someone who understands that justice isn't always loud or cruel. Sometimes it's simply walking down the aisle in the dress they told you not to wear, and never looking back. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.